Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. This is Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee. Today is February 14th, 2023, and it is 8:37 p.m. and we have a quorum. Mr. Price, can we start with a quick roll call?
Sir.
Here.
Deborah.
Here.
Justin. Ball,
Here.
Jack. Present. Jerry.
Present.
There we go.
Present. Kristen Nightingale. Lennon. Lynette Aguilar.
Present.
Matthew.
Present.
Peter. Ball,
Here.
and Roy Lopez.
Great. Have a quorum. I also see that Chair Shadid from the Plan Commission is online. So good morning. Thank you for joining us and feel free to jump in just as any member of the Plan Commission can. All right, we have the minutes from October 11th, 2022. Get a motion to approve them. We have a motion by Commissioner Carpenter, seconded by Commissioner Anderson to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Saying none, all in favor say aye. Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Right, next up on our agenda is an update on the Ford Dallas Comprehensive Land Use Plan. Is that you, Mr. Gill?
Yes. With the presentation, I'm just going through your. We can share your screen. All right, well, thank you all. It's been 4 months since we connected. So we have a lot to share, but we'll be as quick as we can. So from the time that we met last in October, a lot of analysis in terms of the place types and how we orient those and put that in the city. The main goal we're going to show is an actual draft place type map. So putting those concepts on a map geographically and talking through what that looks like. So this presentation is going to be a little bit different instead of me and Brian leading it. The full Ford Dallas team, either virtually and in person, will be taking different chunks of what we've analyzed and reviewed and developed for this plan. So next slide. All right, so the purpose of today's meeting, we're going to provide an update in terms of what we've done so far in the last 4 months. Just giving an update related to engagement, related to the place types where we're located in the city, and also just through how we're going to the next steps for this project. Next slide. And so just make sure everybody online, can you all hear me okay? Just want to give you a thumbs up. Perfect, okay, cool deal. So the call of action we're asking this body to assist us with is one, help the project team just look through any barriers for implementation. That's one item that we're asking you all to look at. Two, just help promote the development of this plan through your networks. Speaking of the importance of land use plan in the city of Dallas. And then three, as we go through the steps of how we got to the place type map, we're going to actually giving you all homework in terms of how you all are going to be analyzing, scrutinizing, and reviewing the map that we present to you all today. Next slide. All right, so the agenda, the outline, again, I'll give a quick overview of what we're doing. I just want to talk about the calls of action. And my colleague, Shalana, will go over the engagement update. we'll transition to Brian and talk about the land use themes, the draft land use themes, that we, helped to summarize through the consultant feedback and the community feedback. We'll present the consultant place type map. That'll be Patrick, and then I'll come back to kind of talk about next steps. Next slide. All right, so overview. What, why, and where? Those are the main questions we'll be asking. But what is for Dallas? You all know what that is, but we're just going to do a quick overview of what that is. Why we're updating the plan, and where are we in the process? Next slide. So why? So we're going to be going through the rationale behind why we're doing this plan, just to get everybody on the same page. So the first reason is authority. Texas Local Government Code and its Dallas City Charter has specific requirements in terms of how these plans, how a comprehensive plan gets developed, and the purpose of having a plan in the city. The main reasons kind of help with the development of the city as it grows. I want to make sure that we're kind of grounding why we're doing what we're doing in terms of the authority that mandates and structures how we do it. Next slide. Two, growth. Like I mentioned, two, we are growing pretty quickly. So NTC COG, our COG, estimates that the city's going to grow 300,000 people by 2045. That's the city of Plano, basically. So think about that number of people coming to the city. So we want to start to look at how do we accommodate that amount of people into the city, in addition to housing, in addition to employment. How do we arrange lanes from what we can control from a planning side? How do we help to kind of guide that development of the city moving forward? We're looking at the growth of the city. Next slide. Thirdly, guidance. So as we are analyzing the land uses, the future land uses that exist in the city, this particular slide just shows basically all the collage of all area plans that exist in the city. So there's certain areas that have a lot of guidance, and there are others that don't. So we want to make sure that we are providing a framework that provides kind of global coverage for the city from a land use, future place type perspective. Currently, we don't have a document that does that comprehensively, and want to make sure that we get that particular type of guidance just to help with predictability from a future land use perspective, and how do we implement that future land use vision moving forward. Next slide. Fourthly, policy. So in addition to just the land use component of what we're doing, we are also looking at other policies that have been recently adopted, CCAP and mobility plan and the racial equity plan, and pulling out specific items that they have called this particular comp plan to look at. So CCAP, for example, identifies the comp plan as helping to reduce transportation-related GHG emissions, for example. And the racial equity plan identifies that the comp plan should be identifying mixed uses in historically disadvantaged communities to help increase walkable and affordable housing. So each of these plans, the others, we're not showing the totality of the plans here, they're specifically identifying the comp plan to do certain tasks to reach their goals. So we want to make sure that we're tying in with those already adopted city policies as we continue to develop what we're doing here. Next slide. Fifth, equity. Again, as we mentioned with the racial equity plan, there's certain items or tasks that they're called out that we need to do from a comp plan perspective. But in addition to that, from a land use perspective, racial inequalities and equities were built into land use that we looked at in prior meetings. We're going to try to use this plan to create that future land use map that helps to clearly and predictably identify where land use and how land use should be developed in the city. Again, as that map that I showed previously, there are certain holes, certain gaps in the city. We want to make sure that we're covering the entire city and addressing some of those land use inequities that existed. And also, too, one other item that the previous plan didn't do well was provide a clear path toward integrating the neighborhood policy and neighborhood and area plans. We want to make sure that this plan provides implementation steps that are guided by residents that help them get to that place. Next slide. So just kind of putting us in terms of the time frame of where we are. So we started this project in 2021 in fall. And as we move toward 2023, we're going to start to unpack the draft plan for review, start to engage the community, your body, council, CPC, in terms of starting to review what the actual plan document is. So there's going to be a lot of public hearings and feedback and commentary as we move toward fall 2023. But right now, we are in the latter stages of the land use visioning phase. We're going to be showing you all the preliminary place type map for review. That's going to take the next several months, probably even going into the fall. And we're also going to be starting that scenario development process, which is where we start to bring in data in certain areas of the city, and identify some of the metrics that a particular type of land use designation would have on the community. So those are all things that are happening now. We've identified those with color, and we'll continue to elaborate on those in the next few months. Next slide. All right, so as we kind of talk about the rest of this process, engagement is going to continue throughout the entirety. So next up is going to be our engagement manager. Just going to talk about what we've done from an engagement perspective and kind of just paint the picture in terms of how we address some of the issues from the past report that we developed to what we're doing now. So to you, Sean.
Can we come down there?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning. My name is Shalonda Van Johnson, and I'm a part of the Planning and Urban Design Community Engagement Team. So as Lawrence mentioned, I'll talk to you about 3 things today. What have we done? What have we heard so far and where? And what is the community telling us? Next slide. So to date, we have had over 50 in-person events. That includes events that we've held or we have attended. We've touched over 1,000 people in person at those events. And some of those events included our series of 4 Dallas visioning sessions where we partnered with the transportation department. We also held in-person City of Dallas staff open house in which we kind of got their input, but then also helped to connect Forward Dallas with the work that they were doing. So if you all can see some of these maps over here in the back of Laura in our chair, those were some of the input that we received from city staff. And we also set up tables at various libraries throughout the city and attended various events and set up tables there just so we could make sure that we were not just asking people to come to us, but that we were also going to where people are. As you know, we have a map, a social pinpoint map, and we've had over 8,500 visits on that map. We've had over 3,200 online unique visitors with 600 comments on that map. And the map is very user-friendly. It allows people to go on there and provide area-specific comments about just about areas that they're passionate or that they want to provide input on. Next slide. So in May of 2022, we provided a report to show you where we had engaged, where we have done our engagement. And so this blue shows those areas. And one of the things that came out of that is that we needed to dig a little bit deeper as far as just reaching some of those hard to reach populations. Next slide. And so this slide shows the blue again. It shows where we had engaged up until May of 2022. And then the yellow shows May through the present where we've done our in-person events. And then the light pale shows where we have received our online comments. And so 60% of our meetings were held in census tracts of majority Black and Hispanic. And that was that hard to reach population that we were trying to get to. And of course, the darker the color on the map, that means the more engagement that we did in that area. And so what have we heard? On your left here, these are all just kind of everything a lot of things that we've heard. And then some of the things that have really resonated are here on your right, include mobility and connectivity, quality of life, housing choice, equality, neighborhood stability, environmental quality. So those are some of the things that have kind of resonated, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. And so I will now turn it over to my colleague, Brian Price.
Thank you, Shalonda. Good morning again, everyone. So as Shalonda just alluded, I'm going to briefly review the land use policy themes that have been generated through extensive community feedback. So, these themes, let me just sort of preface, these are the overarching priorities that we have heard from the community that will have direct impact on some of the land use tools and implementation steps that will be coming out of the plan. And it's our intention to make sure that this body and subsequent bodies and the community is comfortable in understanding that translation from priority to action. So we'll talk more about that as this presentation unfolds. So just so everyone understands the process of how we got to these themes. So as Shalonda just mentioned, we started with community land use issues and priorities. We really kicked this off back in 2020 in the fall through a series of online workshops. If we'll recall, we were still kind of on the tail end of a pandemic at that point. So we were engaging in mostly virtual meetings, but we had quite a few residents participate in a fairly well-structured process where we got to assign essentially one planner for 10 to 12 residents and really have an in-depth 45-minute conversation about what they cared about. And we helped work with them to make sure that the issues that came up were directly relevant to land use so that their feedback would plug into this plan as effectively as possible. From that, in 2021, we facilitated extensive surveys with quite a bit of reaction that sort of built off this foundation and continued to gather feedback from the community just about what's important to them and what about those issues. So we really, the data we've collected really breaks these topics down to a very minute level. Finally, the draft land use policy themes that you see is really a distillation of that feedback into a few core ideas that we feel summarize that feedback. And I feel like in the ultimate plan, we will be able to demonstrate sort of that progression from community feedback to summary of community feedback to themes. And I think we're really quite confident that the themes we've come up with and the subtopics that comprise those themes really reflect the active engagement of the community and letting us know what they care about when it comes to a land use plan. So the themes that are drafted, by the way, they're still in draft form. We're still receiving feedback. This is for us to present what we have heard from the community and continue to work through that. So we have environmental justice, which also includes other environmental sustainability issues, housing accessibility, economic development and revitalization, urban design, TOD, transit-oriented development and connectivity, and rural agricultural and greenfield areas. And I'm going to break those down here briefly. So environmental justice, to actively promote and protect environmental sustainability, public health, and equity through our natural systems and built environment. So this was a really important theme that's going to tie directly into our CCAP goals, which have already been adopted by council. It includes issues of air, water, land, sustainability and environmental issues, as well as obviously the very important issue of environmental justice and land use residential incompatibilities, particularly in areas of low income and people of color, census tracts and neighborhoods throughout the city. Housing accessibility, one of the core ideas we've heard from the community and have spent quite a bit of time exploring. This focus is really on housing choice. So it's really about housing that's not only affordable, but also in a range of types of housing that our community needs and also where that housing is located. So we know that housing location is key. It provides access to jobs, to transit. And we also want to make sure that as we place this housing, which we know there needs to be quite a bit of new production to meet demand, we want to make sure that this housing production does not, we want to mitigate displacement as much as possible. We also want to make sure we preserve neighborhood fabric and character to the extent that, that's the feedback we're receiving in particular contexts. Economic development and revitalization. So land use here really plays an important role, particularly where we talk about commercial corridors or job centers or clustering of uses related to business and office. So we want to make sure that we leverage our land use regulations to promote economic growth while focusing this economic development in underserved communities, as well as helping to support our commercial corridors and our mixed-use job centers. Urban design, which is from where Forward Dallas is concerned, is kind of the secondary priority to land use. They're kind of linked at the hip, so to speak. So part of what Forward Dallas is going to lay out is a design vision for public spaces in Dallas, focusing on how some of these different elements of urban design, like places, districts, streets, and open spaces, how those should grow, change, and improve through the intentional use of design. So design is going to be incorporated in the place type language. It's going to be incorporated in the plan and hopefully provide a framework for continued work on urban design to provide continued clarity based on community feedback and how to make sure that we're really creating spaces that people really want to live, work, and play in throughout the city in contextually appropriate ways. TOD and connectivity. So this was another big opportunity that we've heard from the community and have continued to explore. So we want to make sure that with all of the transit options and spaces in Dallas, with all the DART stops, as well as some other modes of transportation, that we can use those spaces around particularly DART light rail stations to spur economic growth, expand housing opportunities, and increase connectivity. So we know there's a lot of underutilized land around some of these stations, and we want to make sure that we leverage and develop this plan in a way that helps us accomplish our other goals in the plan, such as providing housing choice and access to transit. And there has been a study that shows there's something like 60,000 housing units could be constructed within what we're calling a 15-minute city. So there's a lot of opportunity around our TOD stations to meet a lot of our other goals through intentional land use work. And lastly, rural agricultural and greenfield areas. So there are parts of the city that are referred to as rural and or greenfield developments or less developed. And so we want to make sure that in these parts of the city, particularly as they see growth and development, that we can help provide the housing and amenities that are needed in those areas while still maintaining a certain rural character and agricultural lifestyles. So there's some intentionality we'd like to apply to areas like this in the southeast and southwestern portions of the city. This is just make sure that as we grow into some of the last parts of the city that remain less developed, that we do so in an intentional way that is sensitive to the needs of those areas. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Patrick Blades, who's going to talk to us about the place type map tool that I referred to.
Hi, everybody. Everybody hear me? Get a thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you. My name is Patrick Blades. Really quickly, I'm going to talk y'all through, give you a reminder of what place types are, talk about those a little briefly, then talk about how we've gotten to the consultant draft future place type map, and then walk them through an exercise. And I've Lawrence had mentioned about some homework, walk them through an exercise of how we're thinking about getting that feedback. So next slide. So what is a place type? As a reminder, it's this idea that you blend together different types of land uses and different types of design to create a certain type of place that has a certain type of feel to it, right? So up there on the screen, if you're walking through Bridgewood Park, it feels like a certain type of place. Walk down Lower Greenville, it feels like a different type of place. And just like if you're walking down McKinney Avenue, those feel like different types of places. And so that's the conceptualization that for Dallas moving forward with, to understand how we're planning for the next 20 years of our city. Understanding we have different types of places within the city. Now, as we started, the consultant, after taking a look at best practices throughout the U.S., after touring the city, after taking a look at for Dallas in 2006, different area plans. After taking a look at existing zoning, gave us a draft of what they thought the different types of places were in Dallas. We workshopped that last fall with the community here, with a number of different community engagements. And next slide. We have our draft place types in Dallas. There's 12 of them. We're not saying there's only 12 places in Dallas. We're saying there's 12 general types of places that you're going to get in Dallas. As a quick refresher, we've got the regional and open spaces, right? Those aren't neighborhood parks or pocket parks. Those are big areas like White Rock Lake, the Trinity, Mountain Creek. Those are big parks and open spaces. We've got 4 residential types of places. Those are residential neighborhoods. The first one, that's more the rural neighborhood, right? Brian referenced it a little bit earlier. Usually those are in the far southeast and southwest areas of Dallas. You have the traditional residential neighborhood. Those are neighborhoods that are usually built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s. They're mostly single family. They usually have some parks, some schools, some religious, there's some faith-based organizations that are also in there. They're a little bit, sometimes they have limited access. They have curvy streets, some of them will have cul-de-sacs. Then you have the blended residential neighborhood. That's where you start blending a little bit more than just single family. So that's, the M streets where you have the duplexes that are in here and there, popping up throughout the neighborhood. You might have an apartment building that's 2 or 3 stories tall, that's closer to the main streets. We still have the schools and the parks and everything like that. And the last residential one is the urban residential. That's where you're really starting to get away from single family. You're talking about townhomes, you're talking about apartment buildings that are now 4, 5, and 6 stories tall. You're also talking about how in those neighborhoods, you have a little bit more commercial spaces. You have more, wallets and bursts in those areas, and so you're going to end up with, a little bit more corner stores, or a little more retail and bottom floors, that type of stuff. Then we get into more of the areas that are more commercial. They're not necessarily all commercial, but they're more commercial. Those are the 2 that we have here. That's the neighborhood commercial and the middle commercial. The neighborhood commercial, that's Lower Greenville, that's the M streets. It's a little bit more walkable, that's lower scale. You might have some apartment buildings that are in there, some townhomes, but again, they're not going to be very tall. Getting into that middle commercial area, that's going to be a type of place that has a little bit more intensity, right? It's more of a corridor strip that has a lot of commercial in there. You're going to get some 4 and 5 story tall buildings. Some may be apartment buildings, some may be office buildings, some may be hotels. And then you're going to get, we have 2 industrial place types. One, that's the industrial hub. That's industry. That's big warehouses, distribution centers. That's the most industrial place type that you have in Dallas. You then have kind of the flex industrial space, right? You're going to have warehouses in there, but some of them might be a little bit smaller, right? You're also going to get a blend of some different types of things. You're going to get a little more retail. You may have some residential, like this is more the design district, and less the heavy industrial places that are off of Regal Row or 35. Then you have the last 4. Those are the most intense areas for our city. You have with the regional commercial and mixed use space, right? That's the Golden Towers are off of North Central, right? That's some of the areas near the Galleria. That's some of the areas near North Park. That's some of the areas near the Cedars. Those are areas that aren't as intense as downtown, but those are definitely areas that have apartment buildings that have a mix of commercial, that have a mix of retail, right? It's not just going to be a hotel or an office tower. It's now going to be a hotel and office tower with a view. Then you have the institutional, the campus place type. That's where you have one institution that's driving how that place feels. So that's not a clinic that Parkland has somewhere, but that's Parkland's main campus, right? That's not a DISD school, right? That's the Eastville campus of Dallas College, right? Or that's Dallas Baptist University. You have one thing that's the driver, and when you walk there, you're like, this doesn't feel like a residential neighborhood. This feels like a campus. And then lastly, you have the urban core that's downtown, it's parts of uptown, that's the most intense areas of Dallas. All right, and next slide. So with that understanding of different types of places in Dallas, our consultant went to work at putting together a future draft place type map for the city. Much like they created the place types, they started with the 2006 Ford Dallas Vision Plan. They took a look at the various plans that we have in different neighborhoods and different areas of plans that we've done. And we also did some community engagement early on, again, last fall, when we were talking about community, when we were talking about different types of places, we also got feedback from people who wanted to say, no, I want this type of place in my neighborhood, or I want to express that it's not just an opinion about a different type of place, but it's also an opinion about where I believe that type of place is. And so they took all of that input and they created a draft future place type map for us. Next slide. So again, I want to read, I said the word draft a bunch of times, but I want to make sure that that lands in your minds. It's the draft. It's the first iteration of something that's going to have a number of different iterations. This is our draft future place type map. To Lawrence's point earlier, this includes the entirety of Dallas. Right? Every square mile of Dallas, every square inch has a designated future place type with this map. And again, it's the first iteration. We're going to come back over and over again until we get this map right. And so it's going to take some time, you know, to iron out some of the details for this future place type map.
So this is based on comments that y'all received, or is this looking at past map, or a combination of both?
It's both. So it's looking at the forward Dallas vision plan from 2006. It's looking at various area of neighborhood plans from 2006 until now. It's looking at the existing land uses that we currently have, and then it's also taking into account comments from the public about their opinions about what needs to change and what needs to stay the same.
Mr. Blades, can I hop in for just a minute? I saw a comment online that folks are having a little bit of trouble hearing. I think this device is where the microphone is.
Yes.
Can you maybe move a little bit closer? Thanks.
All right. For those of you online, is this better? All right. Let me know if I fade out. I do not want to talk for like another 5 minutes and someone say I couldn't hear any of that. So please interject and share. Again, correct me like if you're seeing online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So again, this is our draft consultant future place type map. Again, includes the entirety of the city of Dallas. Every square inch, every square mile has a designation about its future place type. So Lawrence mentioned that we have some homework for y'all. And through this following exercise, and my wife gave me a little bit of pointers. She's a teacher, so hopefully it lands on all of y'all. But we're going to go through a little bit of a microcosm of how we got to a future place type for an area, and then talk through how we're looking to engage y'all and your networks for feedback on this future place type map. So next slide. So the International District, formerly known as Midtown, formerly known as the Galleria Center, and formerly known as a Sears way back in 1974 when it was just a Sears.
Valley View, wasn't
Yeah. Sorry.
it? You said Galleria.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is the former Valley View Center. You are correct, ma'am. So as we can see, most of Valley View has been removed. And I believe there was even a fire on the last remaining structure this past Sunday. So the consultant took a look at this area, the Valley View area, or the Midtown area, or the International District. And they first took a look at a couple of things to get to the future place types. So next slide. So they took a look at our existing land uses. And again, this is a little bit, the parcelization of some of this data shows that there's a lot of retail that's currently out there, which is not out there. But again, that's part of the parcelization of it. But they took a look at the existing land uses that are in that area. Next slide. Took a look at Forward Dallas 2006 centralization. Right? It talks about urban mixed use areas, talks about residential neighborhoods, right? And there's a little bit of blobby, right? Again, because that's 2006, technology has advanced. Next slide. And so taking a look at that and the 2013 Valley View Galleria area plan, which was the Midtown plan, they put together this draft of a future place type map. Again, it shows the majority of the area being a regional mixed use district. It identifies the traditional residential neighborhood there to the east and to the north. And then has some industrial flex space, and then has some urban residential neighborhoods there to the north. So that's a microcosm of how our consultant created this draft map. And again, now talking through a little bit about what we were looking for in a little bit of homework. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not looking for any feedback on this map at this moment. I don't want to throw it out to you to put you guys on the spot or you ladies on the spot. Want to walk you through how we might get feedback on other areas that you may have some knowledge on, or that your networks have some knowledge on. So as you can see, we've identified, or the consultant has identified the majority of the area as that regional commercial mixed-use district. As I talked through before, that district allows a lot of intensity, right? Again, it's that hotel, those offices with a view. As you can see, that abuts there on the east, that traditional neighborhood. Now, you may say, I don't think that strip there may not be a regional commercial place type. I think maybe that strip should be medium commercial or neighborhood commercial place type. You may also say, I'm okay, because again, there is a scale within the the regional commercial mixed use place type that allows for high intensity, but also allows for things like townhomes or lower scale retail. And so maybe it's not changing that future place type. Maybe it's just through the conceptualization that regional place type and how we craft the language in that regional place type that you can accommodate for when different types of places transition from one another or abut each other. Yes, sir.
Why did the consultant, why would they choose this and consider it an international district? What are the metrics behind why you would focus on this particular area, for instance? Why you would label it international district, midtown, all of these different focuses? And how would a community gather inputs to create a focus like this in their community?
So the labels did not come from the consultant. Those come from different iterations of how people have, how the city and the community has labeled those, or how elected officials have also labeled those. And so
the landowners around there wanted to be an international district.
So I haven't had a conversation with those landowners around there, but that's how it has been labeled. Now, it may change that label. Again, it's gone from Valley View to Midtown to the International District in a span of 15 years, that label of it. You know, you can think of it sometimes where a subdivision gets platted and it has a name. Well, 50, 20 years, 100 years later, that neighborhood has a different name.
Yeah.
The community has come together and labeled it differently.
Well, I know that there's a high concentration of international residents and students in the area, which kind of make sense for an international district. But it begins to lean that area to a specific focus, which would be international business or retail or whatnot, which is key. And I think it's a great model. I'm just asking these questions in efforts to get other parts of the city to mirror having some kind of district, and then what are the inputs that would help it gain traction to continue to go down?
Sometimes that designation between labeling and marketing a certain area can go a long way. You're right.
I think we also have to look at these things like really closely and be pro-business on some of this stuff. So I mean, just this is a clear example. As I look at the yellow right there, T-Bar tennis facility is right there, and it's classified as a residential area. That's clearly not residential. It's a tennis facility. So if they wanted to expand, if they wanted to grow, they wanted to put pickleball courts. They don't have a bunch of. Telling them they can't do that because, you know, they want to grow and expand. Oh, well, your place type is wrong.
Well,
We gotta be pro-business.
yeah, and we definitely have to, in creating, because again, the place types are meant to give a lot of latitude. To say it's not just, you know, if we say it's the residential place type, it can be a lot more than just a house, right? In that place type, you would have accessory uses like, you know, faith-based communities, like recreational centers, like schools, and saying these are all allowed. And so if you have that business that's in an area that we say is a residential place type, okay, well, if that matches that place type, if it fits within that accessory type of institution or land use, then yeah, they can move forward.
A tennis facility is not residential, period. I don't know where you're going with that, but what I will say is that that's a business. And as a business, it doesn't fit with the place type.
Well,
So can I hop in here, since we saw a zoning case actually involving TBRM within the last 6 months. And it was very interesting to see the interplay between TBRM, which is completely surrounded by residential and some of the residents' concerns about, as you said, adding pickleball. I'm not disagreeing with anything that you're saying about, needing to look at flexibility within these various districts. But, I just want to emphasize that, as we dig in, we need to think very carefully about what these particular place types allow vis-a-vis, some of the uses on the ground. And there are some really interesting areas like this area where TBRM is, where community serving business uses are very well integrated into the community. And I would hope that these place types would be able to facilitate that sort of sensitive.
And in fairness, I think that's.
I just want to make one tiny comment on that too, is remember the distinguishing that we're talking about land use and not zoning. So the zoning on the ground may allow those uses. This land use doesn't change that. This is looking at the forward mix of uses for the future. So again, if that business or whatever may be allowed under the zoning and has the zoning today, that's not changing. So we have to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and again, it's understanding, it may be a residential place type, but it's a neighborhood. And there are businesses within neighborhoods. And so it's understanding that mix of residential and businesses and other uses that create that place. And so there may be more businesses in some neighborhoods than others.
And it still doesn't usurp the SUP process and the processes that we typically go through. It's to kind of get in front of the aim of future developers and so that they kind of get their minds right on, will I be able to do X, Y, or Z without going through full CPC process?
right.
But I wanted to say that, not mentioning this particular example per se, but I think this is a bad example. Because it's one of the least walkable areas in Dallas. It's least connected to transit. It does not have a lot of mix, of uses and types, building types, typology. And I think that's where it's going. But then that is to say, in other areas that aren't connected, like this one isn't, can there be a concentrated effort to connect them and to create those place types? And I think that's the overarching effort, is to take these areas and insert them with what they need in order to continue to go.
Yeah, and that's part of the underlying policies and the different place types to encourage that walkability and that connectivity. And again, it could be, because again, this area has a PD 887. And so this doesn't change PD 887. But what 887 is, its regulations, when someone develops a site, they're probably going to have to change that. And so this provides guidance to, okay, are they changing to something that matches a certain type of place? If they just want to build single family homes, well, that doesn't match that place type. But it doesn't mean that the CPC and council might not approve that. It just means that, through this process, we said that this should be a more intense, a regional commercial and mixed use type of place that includes a number of different types of land uses.
So with that feedback, do you guys give them options on what can happen or what would be ideal or how things, because I'd be expecting to see, lines and hatches and all kinds of things over this particular area that inputs or that describes the inputs that come into the site in terms of primary, secondary, tertiary roads and, transit, walkability, infrastructure, and then how that now will create an ecosystem. But without all those inputs, it just seems like a circle around an area that we just decided to put right here, and it doesn't give, at least me, the, warm and feel and fuzzy feeling of it's going somewhere and it has some intentionality.
Yeah, and part of that is, so part of that, different access points and how it can be more walkable, that would most likely come with a zoning case, like those details.
Well,
But it is,
in terms of evaluating the area, not saying, okay, these, corridors are going to spur this project, that project, and that project. But this area is influenced by these corridors that eventually will be the subject matter of why people come here. So it's almost like inserting industry, which is what we've been kind of saying in the southern sector, but using the constructs and the infrastructure that's around there to create something that's more robust that then will help it to continue to be sustainable.
Yeah, you also speak to actually how we build these place sites for the consultant. So I think all those metrics you just mentioned are actually part of each of these place sites. So the density in terms of the streets, the types of streets are in there, the types of form, the types of uses, those are all, you just mentioned everything that is encapsulated in each of those place sites. We didn't show it today because we showed it to you all previously multiple times, to prevent confusion, but you're on the money that all those elements are actually part of each place site. So as we go from place site to place site, you sort of see the different types of streets, density, orientation, and the idea is to kind of show that as well as we kind of bring this more out into the public, so they can kind of see each place type has these elements.
Yeah.
And they're kind of trying to get to this type of development. So you're right on the money with what you're saying. We do have that information, we just didn't show it today.
Well, and also, I just want to clarify too, that you're talking about different scales.
Right.
We have to keep in mind that this is the citywide comprehensive plan. So that what you're seeing is the scale for a citywide comprehensive plan. Some of what you're talking about gets to the area plan and the detail that gets included in, say, the Midtown plan.
Right.
That stemmed sort of the very detailed configuration of what the site can look like, how the streets are connected. We won't be able to get to that level on the citywide plan, but for areas that don't have any of this at all, any of that guidance, this citywide plan and those place types and those descriptions provide a solid baseline guidance.
And then one last thing too, I think just so we guys are looking at place types, the core we're looking at are just trying to hit at the spirit of what these places want to be. So when we go into, like you mentioned, more detailed zoning, area plans, want to be able to go back to the spirit of what that place and what the community wants and how that ties into all that more legal policing tools from high level to more minutia level. So I think as we, we'll go through this exercise too, but that's the idea. We want to make sure we're hitting at the spirit of what these communities want. In terms of what Roy mentioned, like this is a business area. This type of land use. What's the spirit that we're trying to get from these place sites, and how does that connect to implementation?
Well, if that is indeed the case, Lawrence, then why do we have these like tiny little?
That's another, you're actually jumping ahead too. So yeah,
That to me doesn't go to the spirit of what you're talking
no,
about.
of course. So that's actually what we're going to be doing if we go to the next slide. It's all good. So what's next? So that's exactly what we're looking for. If you go to the next slide, call to action, I'm going to show this slide again. So one, you all to review and provide feedback on this map. And you mentioned one thing I want to actually talk to you all too about. As you look at the place site map, we can either print it to you all, we're going to show it on social pinpoint. Any method that you feel would be best to provide information for us, please let us know. We're going to provide a few options, but we want you all to provide us with how to best empower you all to provide that feedback. One of those would be, as you look at these place sites, if some of these place sites look too small or too big, identify that. Like, why is this a tiny little blip in this area? Why isn't it not part of this? Or moving forward, something like that. One, have you all provide comments on the map related to areas that you know and areas that you know that's developing a certain way. Two, it says our teams look through the areas of implementation. The role of this body is to help do that, to help us look at how do we implement one, a future place site map that reflects the community. And then you all, some of you all are part of the CPC, you know how zoning and land use is developed. We're going to rely on your expertise to kind of help us look through those barriers in terms of getting that through the next steps of this process. And then thirdly, help us promote the development of this plan through the networks. Speaking of the importance of future land use, place site map in the city, you mentioned that again through other identifications of certain policies, legal elements, but one, help us identify what's the best way that you all would like to kind of provide those feedback to us, the comments to us. Again, like I mentioned, we have social pinpoint, an online mapping tool that you all are familiar with. We'll be uploading this map to that environment. So you all, in addition to the public, can start to provide comments in terms of this particular area needs to be this, or this looks good. We can also print that map for you all if that's desired, but any method you want, I'm stressing this, any method that you feel would best help you all to provide those comments. We want you all to do that for us, please.
Do you have that uploaded into like a city's GIS system?
It's internal for drive purposes.
Okay.
So right now, our consultant has sent that to us and we're using it to analyze. So the version that you see on the map is a version that will be sent to social pinpoint for the public to review.
Do you have like a jam section on areas? Cause I think it'd be easier, cause a lot of stuff that I throw out on the table,
Right,
I need to be beat back from.
right.
And
And we'll have actually.
it's easier that way.
Yeah, like they said that our next meeting that we have is gonna be similar to that, where we kind of maybe identify some locations in the city where we're gonna dive in and have a kind of jam session together, provide tweaks to what's on the ground. So that's something that we're gonna be doing as well. And the next slide goes to the next steps and what's upcoming. So as we mentioned, and Andrew mentioned, one part of what we're doing is looking at different scales of development in the city. The comp plan is massive, so we have to stay at a high level to be able to address certain of these vision, principles, and ideas. But another part of what we're doing for Dallas is looking at urban design. So urban design and lanes, when those come together, we can start to develop in a more clear fashion what an area looks like, what it wants to be. So the next step is what we're doing is developing an urban design framework. So it's going to talk about districts, nodes, gateways. When you put that layer of information on top of a future place type map or future land use map, you can start to understand how a particular community is going to be wants to be developed. So that's going to be what we're working on next. Again, continuing community engagement. We're going to be doing that through the entirety of this process. There's only identified that that's what we're going to be doing as well. Scenario development. So going back to what you mentioned about kind of looking at particular locations in the city and thinking about what types of land use changes would result from that. The consultant is going to be doing the same thing, looking at certain metrics for certain areas of the city that help to push some of the policies that we identified and start to see what effects does a particular place type designation do for that particular type of place. The idea behind that is to kind of get an idea of what that looks like, replicate that throughout the entire city and get an understanding of what's going to happen from a future land use perspective in terms of, permeable surfaces, tree canopy cover, heat island effect, all those elements are going to come together to help us make a better informed decision about the effects of certain place types in the city. Yeah.
I know that for my particular area, the metrics don't reflect where the community wants to go, the potential of the community. So we'll need some real guidance and hand-holding on what can be in terms of a visioning session. So that we make sure we're forward-leaning and creating those place types and inputs that are needed.
Okay, we'll do that. Perfect. And then lastly, on this list, again, this is not the entirety of the timeline, but just the next upcoming steps. A draft plan, implementation steps, recommendations for you all to continue to help us review and tweak. So in addition to the place type map, in addition to the draft urban design principles, next time, hopefully I think the next few times that we meet, we're going to start to show and pack a draft plan for you all to also look at. So basically the concepts that we show here, we're going to flesh those out. So we're going to flesh out more policies. We're going to have a little bit more detail on the place type mapping and feedback on the tweaks that you all provide to us, and also thinking through implementation. How do we move from this, again, very vision oriented type of plan that actually technically and legally could be hard to implement if there's no steps that we kind of connect to zoning, connect to other departments as well. So we're going to need your assistance majorly on that piece. Next slide, I think that is, okay. So again, we'll link this to as well. The engagement report that we had last year, the existing conditions report that we had as well. And this presentation will send links for you all to just review and analyze. We're asking that you look at those documents, or come to us and we can kind of help direct you to the information you need to make an informed decision related to your feedback on the place site map. So, with that, that is all we have, and we are looking forward to just a conversation now related to, your thoughts, issues, concerns, so we continue to move this forward.
Great, before we go to questions for members of the body, I know we have public speakers on our agenda. I just wanted to confirm, we don't have anyone signed up to speak online, right, Mr. Agu? And do we have anyone here in the building?
Not check, I really don't
Check,
check.
can we check real quick? I think it would be good if we heard from them before we hop in for the members' questions. Okay, all right. Who wants to kick it off with questions or comments? Commissioner Anderson.
I think this is really interesting and appreciate all of the great and hard work that you guys, have been putting into it. It reflects, a lot of thought and effort that seems to have begun to move this thing really forward. The comment that I have is relative to cross-pollination of efforts through the city. There's, a new economic development policy. They're working on a new housing policy. And I think that, efforts for Forward Dallas should be made to grease the skids for the success of those policies. And also, at least in conversation, to begin to reflect how those policies and this Forward Dallas, will begin to move the particular areas that they're focusing on in the right direction. And most of that will have a lot to do with land use, and the various zoning things that we'll be concerned with. So I think they should marry, or at least have conversation with each other about making sure that you're on the same page, since we're spending money on both sides.
Right, and you can go to slide 9, I think it's kind of a quick snapshot of just that same point of looking at other policies and how it ties in. That's sorry, which slide? Oh, it's just. So yeah, so just, this is not the comprehensive list of area plans and plans we've looked at, but you're on money in terms of all those plans, we have to look at them because they can't implement what they need to do if we don't do our job, and then vice versa. So I think you're on the money, because as we look at these plans, they're asking us, can we have a meeting to talk about how we actually, reduce transportation related to GHG emissions through lanes? What does that look like?
Right.
So we have a technical review committee that's in addition to this body, that's comprised of city staff and staff departments, other local agencies like DART, the county, and I think Bill as well, also neighboring communities. They're helping us kind of figure out how do we move this forward. So I just wanted to pull this here to kind of show that that's definitely a part of what we're looking at. And from an implementation standpoint, we're going to be starting to identify who's going to be those departments that kind of leads the effort to kind of move certain elements of forward as well. Just like CCAP has some goals for us, we're going to have some goals for other departments in the city, also for this body and other bodies, because we're all kind of work together. If we don't work together, nothing's going to really happen in the work. So I appreciate the point.
And great work, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I can say, I see a problem immediately when I see the map at the location of industrial areas. And because what I see is a perpetuation of the pattern of environmental injustice, because I see your industry still segregated, clustered in West Dallas and Jockey area in Northwest Dallas. And to give any credence whatsoever to the 2005 West Dallas area plan is a mistake, because that plan itself was a monument to injustice, because I served on that committee 30 years ago. I was a person who drove every block in West Dallas and documented what was on the ground with a gigantic map and colored pencils. And the community got together and gave very sober, realistic suggestions on how they wanted to transition. And the people who were in the planning and urban design, whatever it's called back in the day, refused to send a single one of their recommendations forward. Their conclusion was that the existing zoning was fine just the way it was, because Dallas at that point in time was not ready to think about the effect of clustering poor communities and industry. So this is to say that these place types are what the community wants is absolutely not what the community wants. So that's just an immediate glaring problem that I see.
Yeah, from your knowledge, what would you say the community would like to see there in that area? I think that feedback can be like, what should we put on that map to kind of say what they want? From your feedback.
And as I said in an earlier meeting, I don't think those place types are adequate as far as the different types of industrial um, businesses that there are. I mean, I understand the creative, design district oriented, industrial place type. But when you get to just, I don't know what the name of it is, just general industrial. I mean, that includes you have concrete crushing and then you also have logistics facilities. And they're just going to have to be more nuanced there.
Right, no, that's a great point. We have to consider this slide, but Ryan, if you could jump to, it's like slide 56.
Which one, I'm sorry?
56, the hidden slide. So as a consultant looked at the old board down, we mentioned, like, I think it had some inadequacies. And this draft place site map, like you mentioned, the industrial area that they had was kind of this swath of just industrial, one kind of bucket, and there was no nuance in there. So I think what we're looking at in this draft is to kind of start to create nuance with place types. So I think there are some areas that should identify and stay kind of industrial, because that's kind of what's needed in that particular area. But I think also having other types of place types that are adjacent or kind of have some lower kind of type of industry land uses are also important to what you just mentioned, because just having one swath of just industry or residential, that doesn't provide a clarity of the community wants. So
Well, or even what the issues are, because, we have in the, southwest, south central, the logistics, the inland port area and all that, we just have huge logistics
Right.
areas, and they're completely different.
Right.
Layout of ground, and different issues.
Right.
With truck access and island trucks and all this sort of thing. It's a completely different set of situation from an area that's a mix of, metal shops and welding shops and that sort of thing. And then you have the huge dirty industries, the
Right.
concrete crushing, the batch plants,
Right.
and then to just have that all intermingled is just not really helpful.
yeah, and that's one thing we looked at too, in addition to just looking at the city. It was important that we're looking at other periphery city future land uses on the southern end of the port. So from Lancaster to southern of the development, we actually talked to some of those officials in terms of what they want. They actually want those areas to develop as industry, because that's their main economic driver. It's interesting. So I think looking at what we want from the city and how that ties in with from a regional perspective, their future land use as well. A little bit, I think, brought that up.
And especially now we're getting the conflict between the agricultural designation.
Right.
It's what the development
Right.
drive is warehouses.
Right.
But does Dallas need to have a conversation? Is that the best use of our land? We're so short of 300,000 units,
Right.
or enough housing for 300,000 people. Do we want to use this land, very scenic land,
Right.
formerly agricultural land,
Yeah.
to be commercial motor vehicle parking lots and?
Yeah, it's a great point too. Yeah, the agricultural, I think, on like the zoning, like implementation. I'm so glad you're on this committee, because you can kind of help us kind of talk about, so when we move to zoning, what does this agricultural zoning category need to actually be? How does that help to transition from this place type vision that we're looking for to actually on the ground? So I think the agricultural designation that you mentioned, right now it's a placeholder in zoning, it's not really agricultural. So how do we look at redefining that through zoning? What is that next step of like making sure that the zoning ties into that vision? That's what we're gonna be needing, your expertise on. So-
Yeah, and I would just, because I was in Cleveland like 2 weeks ago, and I think it's a good microcosm of what you're talking about, because most of that is not, it's either ag zone or it's some type of commercial industrial zone, but it's using as most of it's residential. And so how do you have that residential rural neighborhood place type that's there to recognize that just because it was annexed in 1978 and has some underlying placeholder zoning, that's not how it's been used, and that's not how that community wants it to be used moving forward. And I think, that's a very good point. And
That
as,
pushback has been consistently, they want to maintain a rural residential lifestyle.
Yes.
The zoning cases that we're seeing are all for denser, urban type, single family, or it's commercial motor vehicle parking lots and warehouses. And
Yeah.
those are about as incompatible as you could
Yeah.
possibly get.
Yeah.
So.
yeah, and again,
that's a Visioning problem for the
yeah,
city.
and again, because a part of it is a lot of the underlying zoning kind of allows it, and then, it's the commercial motor vehicle parking, well, is it within 500 feet of, well, no, it is a house, but it's not zoned for the house, and so you have those incompatibilities, so, yeah.
Well, like a makerspace or an advanced manufacturing center, or something that's, class A clean space,
Right.
but it's still considered
Right.
industrial or light industrial.
Yeah, you can integrate some clean, that's hard to.
Yeah.
Like that zoning, has it, yeah,
Yeah.
small, cleaner industries,
It's the-
and things that are,
Right.
nobody needs to live next to a commercial. or-
Yeah, it's the 500 or the 5,000 or 10,000 square foot makerspace, right? As opposed to the 100,000 square foot warehouse, yeah. And so that's a little bit, as Lawrence was talking about how, it was just industrial over here. He said, no, we need to off-ramp both of those because that 10,000 square foot makerspace is different and is much more compatible with somebody living close to it than the 100 square foot warehouse.
And that's a place where we probably need a code amendment to differentiate between warehouses, because there's one label of warehouse.
Yeah.
It's not, you have the kind of place that has, that stocks air conditioning filters, and then you have, Procter and Gamble
Right.
logistics center with a children.
On the same,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah, you just go down 45 at Wilbur and you just,
Right, yeah, you see one,
you
yeah.
don't see good urban design.
And that's the opportunity though, and what I mean by intentionality in developing these areas, you got the largest land mass, it's very scenic, as Commissioner Carpenter said, and what we do with it really matters. If you put warehousing and industrial, that's a place type.
Mhm.
However, the communities don't necessarily want, so there is a shortage of housing. And we've got a lot of land, so yeah, we could use it for housing. There's a shortage of businesses in the southern sector. And all of that needs to be addressed in our placemaking and utilizing these nodes in order to insert a catalytic situation. That is not defined by the current metrics in the area. So it's gonna take some guidance from the leaders in the room, from the city, to tell the consultants that you're managing that we need some structured guidance for these particular areas that will lead to something that's more catalytic.
Well, and one of
I have a question.
That one of the big
We'll
asks.
get to you in a minute.
Sorry. That one of the big asks that we're going to talk to this group about and be sending out more information and sort of going back to the homework is we know that right now we don't necessarily have the localized feel of the place types. And that we need more language in there to really address the environmental justice issue, to address the housing issue, to address the interlinking of, where you have those uses next to each other and how we're going to handle that moving forward in the future. So we know that that's, I've been saying we're at a little bit of the sterile draft point, right? Because it's the first iteration. So this is the discussion that we need to have of how do we make sure that we have enough guidance and language in these place types, whether it's a whole entirely new place type or it's amending or reworking the language in the existing place types that we have. So we are addressing all of those concerns that have come up through the years. And then we can really start working to resolve some of those issues through this land use plan.
Great, and we have a couple speakers online or members online who had some comments. I'll go to them in just a second. I just want to piggyback off Commissioner Carpenter's comments that I think we need some additional gradation within the industrial place types, particularly between, there are very noxious industrial uses, there are concerning industrial uses, then there were, innovative, potentially clean industrial uses. And I think that's important not only for figuring out future direction, but also for the sake of transparency. When we talk about, to some extent, continuing to have heavy industry within the city of Dallas that can be noxious, we need to be transparent about where we're saying that we would allow that to what extent.
So a place type that's more reflective of the industry on Singleton, a place type that's more reflective of the warehouses on 20, and then one that's more reflective of the smaller warehouses that were built 50 years ago kind of in the design district.
Maybe I would defer to Commissioner Carpenter on that one, because I think she's going to be able to provide much better input with her extensive experience on the ground in West Dallas. But
What I find is, most people who go into planning do not have a lot of experience of living adjacent to industrial. I'd be happy to.
Anyway, I think I saw Mr. Goldstein's hand first, and I saw a comment or a question from Mr. Hawkins. So, Mr. Goldstein?
Thank you. Real quickly, Lawrence, this is moving forward very nicely. Great job. Lots of work has gone into it. Just a couple of comments, observations. One is I think it's going to be super important that it's crystal clear to the public, because I think even we keep having this conversation, that these place types are not exclusive by any means, that there's some flexibility in here, and this is making a distinction between land use and zoning. So I know we keep coming back to that as a group, and I know that the general public, yeah, lots of red flags might go up, per that earlier conversation, that this area, this is all you can do there. So that idea of flexibility and these nuances and even the potential for change over time, I think is going to be super important. The other comment I have that started to come up here a little bit in terms of the land use themes, I was pleasantly surprised about the rural and agricultural greenfield areas. And we kind of started to stick our toe into that water. But, things like maintaining that way of life, is a kind of reason in and of itself, but also, the fact that how these things are all interrelated. So for instance, we have a housing shortage, and that's a priority too, so that this idea of density really helps us maintain some of these lifestyles that we're trying to do. And I guess my question or request is that as we start to develop the language that these agricultural and rural greenfield areas, that we have conversations about flooding and about impervious surfaces, that we talk about sprawl and kind of what the effects of that are on us as a city and a region, ideas about air quality, heat island. I think all those are connected to these peripheral areas around the city that are so important. And if they turn into paved areas, we're looking at some really serious long-term flooding problems, heat island problems, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry about going on and on, but I think that's important.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Peter. I think you touched on a good point that we looked at when we did our ECR analysis. We're looking at the southern sector, that area that's actually less dense or actually has a lot more vegetation than a lot of parts in the city. Some people call that the lungs of the city. Basically, like that kind of helps to, help with that environmental component you just mentioned. So I think those items that you just kind of listed, I think I just jotted a bunch of those down in terms of when we start to look at the effects of certain types of or maintain certain types of place types. I think flooding, sprawl, and pervious services falls in line with what we're looking at too in terms of how we develop metrics to support or actually provide more information relating to which way a particular place type should go moving forward. So I do appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, Lawrence, and I think that's a great metaphor, this idea of the lungs of the city. And of course, in New York, that would be Central Park, right? And in Dallas, we could also maybe continue to think about the Trinity River corridor as serving that really critical urban function.
Makes sense.
Was a Trinity Forest.
Right.
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all for this great presentation. A lot of work being done. I'm not sure if my question is going to skew into some like zoning concerns, but I'm really interested in how these place types and the language that you all talked about, particularly developing more language around the place types, coincides with educating our community on actual parts of our city that may not be usable as place types, right? I'm thinking about Superfund sites. I'm thinking about lead polluted sites like Cadillac Heights. How do we describe those places for future consideration for our community? Because some of those things still need lead remediation and heavy industry waste areas like I would say like a landfill, for instance, right? How do we describe those places when we're talking about future development?
Now, I appreciate that question. So I think when we're looking at these place types, I think it's important to say that we're looking, what is the future vision for the city, the particular area? So there are a bunch of images for super fun sites that represent what's happening now. But what does the community want that area to be? They don't want that, I'm assuming they don't want that to be a super fun site forever. So the idea is to kind of identify what do they want that to be? We actually been working with our OEQS department in terms of some grants for brownfield and also other initiatives to kind of move it from what it is to what it could be. But I think what we need from you, Mr. Hawkins, is kind of helping us identify what does the community want that place to be? And if it's not identified in a particular place type, what type of place should that place be? So that would be my kind of request to you to help us make sure that this place type that reflects what they want.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm interested in how do what's the part that's missing, I think, is how do we educate the community to know what this is and what type of work, like what type of remediation a Superfund site would require for them to even imagine a different place, if that makes sense, right? I'm thinking about the deep wood dump that turned into the Trinity River Audubon Center, which is now a landfill, right? It needed millions and millions of dollars of renovation before folks could even envision putting a nature preserve there, right? So I'm thinking of that step. What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, so this all in line. Oh, sure. So I think Susan Alvarez from our OQ's department, I think probably has a question that speak directly to that. If you want to speak, Susan.
Yes, I do. I so appreciate Mr. Hawkins' comments around this.
Screen on?
I think so.
Thanks.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Are y'all able to see me?
Still water myself. You're good. You're good.
Okay, so no, I think this is critically important. And it is something that our office is taking on with our new director who has a very, very strong environmental justice background. We're in the process of applying for additional brownfields grant funding so that we can expand the grant work that we're doing around brownfields to clean up some of these areas proactively and look more holistically across the city towards cleaning up the environment in all areas. The other thing that we're working on that I think is critically important as part of the racial equity plan is including environmental justice into the equity indicators and looking for, as we do these cleanups, to raise those environmental scores across the city. So it's not in any shape or form an easy lift, but I think it's a critically important lift as we look at land use. And I think as Lawrence said, we look at where it is right now and we look at what it wants to be. I hope that our office can work in partnership with our friends in planning to get those lands to the place where they can support the types of community that we would like them to be.
Ms. Alvarez, I have a question based on that comment, and thank you for that. For instance, right now there's like $1 million in the racial equity plan. I think it's like $20 million that they're using. Well, $1 million of those dollars is for lead abatement in Cadillac Heights, right?
I believe so, yes.
That's not enough money to remove the lead from the land in Cadillac Heights, right? So
You're right.
So
You're right.
my question is, how do we, and that's the question I was asking of the body, how do we, not do what we did in West Dallas, where we built over, lead in the ground, and folks had to sue the federal government and sue the city and tear those projects down and then build, try to get lead abatement again, right? How do we stop that from happening?
Well, hopefully we will work a little smarter and learn from our past mistakes is the short and easy answer. The harder answer, and it is where our department is really working right now, is how do we holistically look at where we have impaired properties in Dallas, and how do we clean them up appropriately for those end uses? And to be honest, to some extent, it is an iterative process. The land use type at the end of cleanup determines how clean you clean up those lands.
Right.
As an
Exactly.
example, there's an infamous temporary dump next to Floral Farms that once we got the shingles cleaned up, we realized that the underlying soils were contaminated. And so we're cleaning those next. So it's being more, I guess, just working smarter moving forward and being more cognizant of the potential for environmental impairment for our properties moving forward. Hopefully that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Hawkins. Thank you. You touched on a really good point, which I think is starting to kind of spur conversation and embodies that implementation piece and how what we're going to be doing from a vision standpoint. It's kind of very broad, but getting to what you're talking about, like how do we actually make it work? You just touched on like a few examples of that particular case. So I think that's going to be critical that we start to actually be a little bit more specific with how we do what we're trying to do from a high level perspective when we start to look at implementation. So I appreciate that. Do you have a question?
No, I just have a comment that there are locations in Dallas, specifically in West Dallas, where past inequities are driving development because there's a parcel of land that's dozens of acres, Loop 12 and Singleton, where there have been at least 10 to 12 expressions of interest in redeveloping it in the last 5 years. And the development community and the neighborhood are more or less in agreement that they would like to see residential, but that's the one use it cannot be because it's the former RSR lead smelter dump. And there's no way to clean it up. So the only kind of uses that the EPA would say are allowable are industrial warehouses, which are absolutely incompatible with the immediately adjoining neighborhood. So you have a problem unless you just declare it part of the lungs of the city. It's a heavily treated site. There's just no place type that is going to fix that situation. And then we also have other locations where the only possible use of the land is a warehouse or industrial. So that precludes anything else.
Right.
So you either have undevelopable land, undevelopable land, or you have land that use that is contrary to the vision of the community.
Right.
So,
That's a great comment. I think that we saw in a few different places where the particular vision, what the community wants, versus what is actually on the ground, like just to be able to implement that, there's a huge barrier, like you mentioned, like issues on the ground. So how do we actually move that forward? That's one piece of implementation piece that we're actually going to start to unpack. Because right now we're kind of high level, like you mentioned, like we had this draft consultant, but we need that more like nuance, like, okay, this particular location, Singleton, Loop 12, like, how does it actually work? So that's gonna be the next step, to kind of like tease about through these focus areas, to kind of like make sure that the implementation part of that lines in with what the vision wants, and that's kind of what we're excited to do, because that's gonna be the hardest part.
Yeah,
of
and,
this
and
piece.
part of it is that, this process can't fix all of those issues, right?
Right.
I think that's going to be the hardest thing to communicate to everyone about what are the
Right.
specific limitations and the implications of adopting this map.
I think then it's about, once we identify those limitations, then we can say, okay, what can we do? If there's 12 limitations, can we make 3 of them go away? Right? And okay, we move the ball forward, and then working with our other partners, they move 2 more, and all of a sudden we make that progress. And, it is a long range plan.
Can I bring in the big hitters for a large site like that and bring in the EPA and start partnering and maybe encapsulate the site or give a vision of what can happen with the site from an environmental remediation standpoint? Because there's certain ways that you can encapsulate and use the site, but that would then limit the uses and things that you can do. But we still need to know what those are.
Right.
And then, because we may need to take that land out of the inventory so that it just does not reflect even the tax base in that area because it's undevelopable land that should.
Well, that's basically what I have to do is just get the message back to economic development saying, don't send developers over here wanting to put in
Right.
single family, because there's no point in our talking about it because there's already a gigantic barrier.
That's a good point.
But to a larger point, just last point on that, Commissioner Carpenter, I think there's a step that we're missing with that part. And I don't know if this is the body's responsibility, but what is our responsibility in educating the community on the fact that can never be developed ever again, right? I think that's the equity piece we're missing is not that it's, for the city's benefit to never develop their land or to not have developers coming in, but how do we educate the community on what happened here and why we don't want this to happen again? And this is the reason why we're adding equity to this, process, right? And that's the part I think we have to key in on for sure.
So that last part you're saying, I didn't hear it. May you repeat it, please? Mr. Hawkins?
Yeah, of course. So I'll give you an example. So when you go to Trinity River Audubon Center, unfortunately, they've done a poor job in educating the community on what happened from 1980 to 2000, which was illegal dumping, unfortunately allowed by the city of Dallas for 20 years, right? And particularly because they've abated that site, created a landfill that lets out methane gas every day, and they've done an amazing plan that creates a nature preserve where folks can go safely to the site. In West Dallas, at that lead poison land, you cannot do that, right? So how do we create? And I'm saying I don't know if this is connected to the place type work or not. How do we create education for the community to know that, and education for the city to say this is something that we did and we don't want to do this ever again, right?
No, I like that we're kind of talking through ideas about engagement. That's kind of what our team does kind of daily. As you're talking, like how do we identify the limitations for Dallas and say, we can't do X, Y, and Z, but we can do this. And sometimes when we go to the community, we show that or we try to explain that. Maybe it's too technical, but I think getting your feedback in terms of what's the best way of relaying that information or if it's through online or whatever, I think we're open for ideas. Because I think sometimes when we look at it, when we explain it, it might not come across as we want it because we do know there are certain barriers to implementing some of this. So I'm not able to answer that I have right now, but I think there is room for discussion to talk through, okay, what's another way that we can kind of partner to make sure that information is clear through our engagement efforts. So we have a limited tool set or toolbox, but I'd be open if you have any ideas in terms of how we can make that clearer through the next few months leading up to kind of developing of the draft plan.
No, for sure. There's one example I've seen recently. It's Notre Dame. Notre Dame in Paris was on fire. Well, not on fire, burned, partially burned.
Right.
And what they did is they commissioned artists to talk about the story and what it meant to the community. But they also, on one side, detailed the fire and the repair of that building. And they've made this kind of fixing of this amazing artifact in the world a community storytelling project. And I really believe that we have to think about those types of things. It can't be on the city's. It can't be the city's responsibility to communicate totally to the community. But I think if the city creates space where folks are involved in the storytelling of this, particularly the warnings that happen, we can really do a good job.
No, I love that idea.
Can we go back to slide 24?
Is that 24?
Yeah. So when we talk about TOD, we traditionally think about high-speed rail, development that happens around the lines. But I also want us to think about the other TOD, which is trail-oriented development, because in my opinion, we have just shut the door on development around the trails. We literally did fences, those trails, and you know, what a lost opportunity there. But when we think about those transportation nodes, you know, the bikes, you know, the walking, maybe there's a way to blend these place types. When we think place types, you know, they're very, you know, fence-like. We have to blend the green with the residential or the green with the commercial. Tremendous opportunities there. So as we talk about these themes, I'd love to, you know, incorporate the trail oriented development as a component because we have an amazing trail system.
Right.
But it hasn't been treated correctly in terms of the land use because it's so shut off from our neighborhoods and so shut off from our commercial areas. And, you know, there are some great examples of restaurants that have combined the two. And we need more of that.
Right.
And definitely, you know, our neighborhoods need to incorporate that into the development.
What examples come to mind? Just top of mind. Well,
There was that the Katy Trail Ice House.
Yeah, there's some stuff in the Kitty Trail, there's a new development that's on the Santa Fe,
Yeah.
it's right at Red Rock, that,
Yeah.
Commerce and Beckley, there's the Beckley Overlook, and there's a new multifamily and a mixed use where we
Yes.
place them.
Yeah.
It looks like the Flatiron Building.
Yes,
So
yes,
at the
yes,
lower
yes.
level, there's going to be, you know, some sort of retail restaurant space that blends in with it.
And I hate to bring up the H word, which is Houston, but there worlds like that of us in this area, in terms of the trail oriented development.
yeah, the value.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think that might be an opportunity to add in an urban design component with that. And when we think about our trail system and how we're treating that, adding in some language specific to trails and connectivity and the access and how things get developed around it might be helpful.
Yeah, I think we're in early stages of our trail development in our city, so we're kind of in our infancy, but there's some great examples out there that we have to, you know, think through.
So one would think that, the trails would help the carbon emissions, reductions. I know in our area, south of 30, trails are almost non-existent. However, it's the most scenic and opportunistic area to begin to create a trail network.
right.
We need alternative trails also for multimodal in terms of bikes, go-karts, horses, and electric vehicles.
Right.
Because we take the scenic route, which would then go through hills and valleys and creeks. Moreover, we've had discussion, if we're thinking the most forward-leaning way that we can for my particular district, which is District 4, we've talked about an example of the Riverwalk, where we take 5 Mile Creek and make it an economic corridor or some kind of experience, utilizing the area that we have in our district. And that could include walking trails, restaurants, or even just park area that could
Yeah,
could be used. But without us saying this is 5 Mile Creek has an historic history. It's where a lot of the I guess slaves and everyone used that corridor. So we could tell that historic story. But to create that land use is the opportunity that we have between districts 3, 4, and and 8, to create something that's different from the city.
yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Like, when we met with the Parks Department, and both of y'all, like, that was one of the things we said, okay, how do you see parks changing? They're like, let me tell you about 5 Mile Creek, like that trail, that, like, and so to your point of, okay, how do we understand that of building in some type of development off of that trail where it's not just what it is now, but where we're maximizing some stuff down there.
Yeah, I think that's what we would, from my perspective, those are my marching orders to begin to insert industries and opportunities in the areas that we have. So I'd like to begin to introduce that, but also looking at the overall map, our conversation from the community standpoint has been inserting industry, education, and healthcare.
You should say clean industry, they don't want batch plants.
Well, clean.
To be
In-
precise.
Innovation.
Because the city'd be glad to give you some.
But if we could have some innovation, biotech in health and kind of lean on some of the things that are already kind of underway. But in placemaking, we need to make places, particularly in the southern sector, that are robust and catalytic. And I think 5 Mile Creek, paired with the transit-oriented development efforts, also paired with the, food deserts, healthcare deserts, all these opportunities that we have, that we need to create a really good story for and respond for the community.
I appreciate that. That makes sense. So I just want to do a quick time check. It's 10:12. Typically we're here for an hour and a half, two. If you go to the next step slide, I think the calls to action, just want to just remind everybody of the homework that we're wanting this body to do in the next month or so. Basically, as we start to, like, all these comments, I guess, we want a place to put them in. So we're gonna have a place on Super Pinpoint for that. We're gonna have opportunity for just, calling us and let us know about what that needs to happen. But we want you all to start to look at some of these areas that you're called from either as commissioners, community advocates, to kind of make sure that community vision gets placed on a map, and then how we think about implementing that place type or that vision moving forward. I think that's a really great conversation. I jotted down a bunch of notes that I got to move into that social pinpoint environment. But we ask that you all do the same thing as well. We'll provide the links to that tool. But again, if you need PDFs, you need paper maps, please let us know. Kind of help you get what you need to provide that feedback. So I want to make sure that everybody online as well, were able to provide their comments and feedback related to the club body. I can see everybody on the call. Just want to make sure that we covered all the feedback. Okay, I've seen some head nods. Good, awesome. So I think with that.
I have one more
Yeah.
question, feedback.
Yeah.
Just about, can you walk through the timeline moving forward on what's expected, both in terms of us
Right.
as a body and also PUD going back and doing additional community engagement?
Definitely. So again, going to the last piece, community engagement, we're going to do that until this is completed, whatever that needs to be. So that looks different depending on which phase. So right now, we're getting feedback on the map. In terms of, this is what the consultant provided. Does it make sense in your area? That's one piece. We're going to be meeting with this body, at least monthly, to talk through nuance on the map. So next time we meet, we're going to actually probably delve into either certain locations on the map that you all either identify for us, or we have from our consultant to go into a little bit more detail about some of how it gets applied in certain areas. So monthly is going to be the cadence until we kind of get to starting the public meetings and then starting the discussion with council. So I guess just prepare for meeting with us monthly as we move to that. We had on the timeline, fall is the time that we want to have discussions with council and public briefings. But again, we want to make sure that the end goal is to have something that the community wants and it reflects their vision. So that's the markers to move toward fall, to have something that's concrete for council to then approve. So what staff is doing from this feedback that we're going to be getting, we're going to be applying it to the social pinpoint map, talking with our consultant, seeing any conflicts that exist. I think those conflicts might bring that to you all and say, hey, we heard this particular area, you said this, but the community says this. What's a good approach to address those conflicts? Two, what we're going to be doing is providing a little bit more data for you all to have as we look at these land use changes moving forward. So moving forward monthly, it's going to be either a discussion about place types where it's located, how we talk about conflicts that possibly exist, and implementation steps. Okay, if this community says this is what they want, how do we move from what they want to actually making it work post-Forward Dallas?
And it sounds like there are going to be several components that go into the Forward Dallas comp plan between, the place types, the existing conditions, the map, so on and so forth. Do you have a ballpark of when, after we provide input, that's going to be all put together in a document for us?
Right, so actually, great point. So we're actually working now on developing the document. We want that to be actually mostly online, so to be translated in any language we need it to be. So we're looking to shoot toward, in the spring of
to say March, April-ish. We're still kind of thinking through what that looks like with staff times. To have a draft plan that will have the place types, what's the land use that are associated with place types, the draft policies, and then also how do we implement some of those policies moving forward? So it's gonna be, what we want to do is make sure this plan is very lean and focus just on future place types and future land use. The ECR that we developed, the engagement report, those are all gonna be addendums that kind of build upon the documents. We're gonna be updating those documents as well. As we go through the project, we want the core documents to be focused on land use. People can go into a particular area, know what that area says from a land use perspective, place type perspective, urban design perspective, and it's very clear. Like the current 4,000 we have, there's like 12 PDFs kind of broken up, and it's kind of hard to kind of track, like, okay, this place type says this, and we go to this PDF, and we want to make sure that we avoid that, make sure it's clean and lean and clear what we're trying to do with it. From a place type perspective, but it was a good point, so yeah, spring time when we can be having, you all provide feedback on that.
One last comment from my perspective. When engaging the community, could you call them by name? For instance, I live in Oak Cliff.
Right.
I don't know what map relates to Oak Cliff.
Okay.
I'd imagine the Highland Park or Victory Meadows.
Right.
And it shows respect that you know where you are and
Right.
who you're talking to.
Right.
And you may get more response.
Right.
Because people recognize the names of their community, not North Central.
That makes sense. So we actually had a conversation about that because like I live in District 3. Talk to my neighbors like this is Oak Cliff. And then go to my neighbor, it's like, this is Redbird. So I'm like, so if we call it one thing, someone's gonna be like, that's the wrong name.
But
So,
people don't know Redbird is just Oak Cliff.
but makes sense. I think
Area of-
exactly. So they don't care about that. So, she's like, I've been here 40 years. Exactly. So that was speak to the contextual way that people understand the community, which makes a lot of sense. And that's one thing we want to also try to identify through this process. We're not going to be saying that these districts call this, but starting to associate those names to some of these areas, so kind of more familiar
Just ask,
with the community.
ask the audience,
Right.
where are we? They'll tell
And
you.
we actually did that too. That was part of this social big exercise. We had said, what would you name this planning area?
Yeah.
And we have a certain plethora of names, so we can use those names that they provided to kind of help us.
It just gives you more.
Right. So it makes sense. All right, any questions online? Make sure, everybody. Commissioner Rubin.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we had some really good feedback for staff and the consultants, and they have some good direction on some refinements that need to be made. And we also have our, homework here, and I look forward to digging into that map, and hope that gets distributed soon. Please be in touch with city staff and, all of y'all, and get that in a way that's best accessible to you. And look forward to seeing everyone's work and input based on that. Unless anyone else has anything, we'll adjourn. All right, it is. Does someone have some? No?
I think he's waving.
Oh, all right, goodbye. It is 10:20 a.m. and this meeting of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee is adjourned.
Everybody.